Hello, and welcome to Book Reviews Kill, a podcast about fantasy, sci-fi, and horror novels. I'm Evan.
And I'm Chad.
And you're joining us today for our recap and discussion of The Song of Susannah, Book 6 in the Dark Tower series by Stephen King. The penultimate volume in our journey to the Dark Tower is complete. We completed it a little while ago, but I was sick, and both Chad and I are already almost done with Book 7. So this is going to be an interesting episode because Chad and I know quite a bit about what happens afterward, but we're going to try our best we're going to try to just localize this episode to this book.
Go back in time,
right.
Take my brain. I was having trouble separating the stories in my mind earlier today, so hopefully I don't make that error.
Well, it's difficult not to, because I'm not, without spoiling anything, like a lot of the events from this book really, really bleed into the seventh book, almost to the point where the first part of the seventh book is like a recap almost, like not a total recap, but you know what I'm trying to say. So it
feels like the last 100 pages of what this book should have been.
Well, and that's the interesting thing about book 6 is that it's more than anything a bridge book. If there is a bridge book in this series, then book 6 is absolutely no, but it feels the least like it has its own independent narrative. Like it's very dependent on books 5 and 7. It's almost like a really long chapter that sometimes feels like it's supposed to be like in another one of the books. But it is. I mean, it's a tonal shift from book 5, in my opinion, and it's very consistent with book 7. So it's very good. I like book 6 quite a bit, and I feel like a lot of the public sentiment around book 6 is that it's the weakest one in the series, but I honestly really don't think it is. It's definitely not the strongest. I would say book 5 is the weakest personally, but that's just me. I don't know what your thoughts on that are.
I wouldn't say I would say probably book 1 if we're just going for like the ones that really captivated me.
Yeah.
You know, like probably book 1, but like I really liked book 1, but in my mind, I see it kind of as a really long prologue, and it's a really good, really long prologue, and sets the stage for the weird and totally ever-changing journey that we're about to be going down. So I don't know. I liked it. That's not a statement of it being bad. It just wasn't as action-packed or filled with as much dynamic things. We're just with Roland.
Yeah, I mean, book 6 is very well paced in comparison to a few of the other books, but I would say that pacing doesn't necessarily come from action. It's more from questions being answered, a lot of good conversations that kind of move things along toward the final point that we're trying to get to. There are some parts of this book that I think maybe take a little too, like a lot of Mia that maybe doesn't need to be there. But that's
she's not a stay-in character, in my opinion, when I was reading it.
Yeah, but still very interesting. But did we need like 100 pages of Mia? Like, I don't know. Or maybe actually it's like quite a bit more than that. It's funny. This is a fairly long book, but it doesn't feel as long after reading Wizarding Glass and Wolves of the Kala. Like, I feel like I just burned right through the Dark
Tower.
Yeah, exactly. The Dark Tower is so long.
Oh my gosh.
But with all that being said, this was a very excellent book, and I'm really excited to sit down here and talk with you about it, Chad, and get a lot of your thoughts on this before we head into our second to last episode, if you want to count Went Through the Keyhole, but our last episode, which will be coming up soon for book 7 in the Dark Tower series. But we got to get this one out of the way first, so let's get the recap all finished up here.
Let's do it.
The book begins after Susannah's escape through Doorway Cave. Roland, Eddie, and Jake confer with the Manny in Cala Bryn Sturgis and plan for Roland and Eddie to enter the door to rescue Susannah, while Jake and Father Callahan will go through next to convince Calvin Tower to sell the vacant lot. This does not go according to plan, however. The groups get sucked through in opposite order. Jake and Father Callahan to 1999 New York, and Roland and Eddie to Maine in 1977. Meanwhile, in New York City in the year 1999, Mia is frantically searching for a place to have her baby. Susannah finds the scolpata inside a pocket in the Midworld bowling bag. She uses it to get a hotel room to await the phone call Mia is expecting. While Mia and Susannah wait, they discuss the origins of the baby. Eventually, Richard Sayre calls and instructs Mia to go to the Dixie Pig to have the baby. Susannah leaves the scolpata outside the Dixie Pig for Jake to find. Inside, Susannah Mia is taken through a door to Fedig, where they are separated. Back in 1977, Roland and Eddie are dropped in the middle of an ambush set up by Jack Andolini. They meet John Cullum, who helps Roland and Eddie escape the ambush and takes them back to his house, where he tells them of Stephen King, Turtleback Lane, and the Walk-Ins. He lends them his old Ford Galaxy truck and is told to leave for Vermont. The duo meet with Calvin Tower and Aaron Deepnow and convince them to sign over the deed to the vacant lot to the Tet Corporation in order to keep the roads safe. Roland and Eddie visit Stephen King, whom the gunslinger hypnotizes. We find out that King is not a god, but rather a medium for the story of the Dark Tower to transmit itself through. Roland also implants in King the suggestion to restart his efforts in writing the Dark Tower series, which he has abandoned of late, claiming that there are major forces involved that are trying to prevent him from finishing it. The Katet are convinced that the success of their quest itself depends somehow on King's writing about it through the story. In 1999 New York, Jake nearly shoots a driver that almost runs over Oy, but is stopped by Callahan and the Reverend Earl Harrigan. Jake finds the hotel where Susannah Mia left Black 13. They attempt to remove it safely, but it wakes up and urges them to murder each other. They almost succumb to Black 13's influence, but Callahan uses his restored faith to put the orb back to sleep. He and Jake then move Black 13 to a long-term storage locker underneath the World Trade Center, with the hope that either it will stay dormant or Roland will at some point come to destroy it. They then head to the Dixie Pig, where they find the Skolpada and prepare to ambush the forces within. The book ends with Jake and Callahan entering with weapons raised, and Susannah Mia about to give birth in Fedig, a town in Thunderclap. In the epilogue, we read the diary of Stephen King, which details his writing of the first 4 books of the Dark Tower story. It is said that the character, Stephen King, dies on June 19th, 1999. All right, short, sweet, to the point. Also kind of an acid trip of a book.
It's an acid trip of a book.
It's a lot. Yeah.
I mentioned to you previously before we started that the amount of weird in these books grows proportional to, or similarly to how the amount of like graphic content in the Akatar series.
Yeah, it just keeps ramping up.
Yeah. And I thought, I now know that this is not true, but looking at my notes here when I hadn't started the next book, I was like, okay, this book is going to be the culmination of weird in this series, because the last book, he's like, obviously got to finish up a bunch of stuff. It's going to be this nice, pretty ending, which I don't know if I'm going to get that, but I just thought he was going to have some fun with this book, and this was like his book to do that. But like, that is totally incorrect.
No, this is
Weird
the on-ramp to the weird.
Yeah.
And, you know, I mean,
in a
it's
good
like
way.
the weirdness is not, it's not really like these odd things happening that don't make sense. It's more
they serve
like
the story.
It absolutely serves the story. It's more like, you know, it's getting more meta, obviously, because we see Stephen King. Actually, let's just start with that. I wanted to ask you about that. What did you think about Roland and Eddie's meeting with Stephen King? Like, do you think that King, like our King on our level of the tower, like did a good job making himself into a character?
So I have thoughts on this. I liked him being in the story. I thought it was unique. I thought it was fresh. I liked him being mentioned in the story. And then they visit him literally, and I was so undecided for probably a few days after even that scene. And I like went back and kind of skimmed over it again, because it really does add to the story. And I've never seen another author do it before. I've never seen that sort of self-insertion into a story. And I feel like it's kind of surprising that I haven't.
Yeah, I mean, if it has happened, it's not to this degree.
Right.
Yeah.
And, you know, at first I was like, is he making himself a god? And like, no, he's more the mouthpiece for the story. And he approaches it very humbly and very realistically. And I was like, he did a great job doing it. Like, at no point could I find fault in his execution of that idea.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the way that I look at it is that King wrote himself as like a beam, almost.
Yeah,
you know what I mean. Like it's like his job to support. Like, how do I say this? To like hold up the characters that are trying to hold up the tower, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's like it's almost like he wrote himself as almost like an inanimate object. Almost like, does that make sense?
Yeah,
like,
yeah, totally. And then he's
maybe
almost
not inanimate
used that way too. They like erase his memory, you know.
And they're also like dicks to him. Like,
yeah.
well, I mean, they're not. So I think that a really cool thing that King did is that he wrote not himself, but he wrote his idea of himself in the 70s from the early 2000s. So it was like an older man writing about a much younger, like kind of naive and lazy writer. Like I mean,
Right.
he like even King in this book, like he kind of comes off like he doesn't really think much of himself.
Right. There's obviously some like substance abuse going on. Lots of beers
Yeah,
everywhere.
yeah, and even
As soon as like the
Roland and
first thing
Eddie,
kind of tumultuous happens, he's like, "I'm hitting a beer."
right?
Like,
Exactly, and it's like kind of early, I think.
yeah, yeah, it's way early. And he's gonna go pick up his daughter like right after that.
And obviously, I think that King has been very open about his substance abuse and like his own critiques of himself and like
I
writing
do
it
believe he
in like
dumps out the
this.
rest of his beer though, so he like kind of makes note of that he's not like he's being responsible, kind of,
It's interesting. Yeah. I think that it's a very cool idea that he did it. It never really bothered me. Like it never was this, maybe it's because I'm such a huge Stephen King fan, but for me
No,
reading
it
this,
didn't
this
bother me
is,
once I thought about it more.
yeah, I mean, and that's not knocking anybody that has a problem with it because I can see why for somebody, especially if it's your first time reading these books, I can see why it seems like this like self-indulgent kind of unnecessary thing to do.
If he would have saved an orphanage, I would have hated it.
I
But
mean, the
that
whole
wasn't how
thing
he
is
used it.
self-indulgent and unnecessary, though. I
Of
mean, like
course.
that's neither here nor there. But I will say it seems like King putting himself in makes a lot of sense for the nature of these books, right? If you were moving around a bunch of different dimensions and things like that, you'd be bound to run into yourself. It asks a lot of really interesting questions that are difficult to answer. Like you said, he did it in a way where it wasn't King turned himself into the most important person in the universe, and it's
Saves
not
the
really like
day.
that. No, no,
No.
it's he's just like some dude
Right.
that the tower is using to tell its own story of sorts and hold itself up. And in
Hmm.
another way that I look at it is like there is a certain duality here in this series, and Roland and his quartet and John Cullum and like a few other main players in even like Father Callahan, things like that. They're the white, right? They're the side for good, and like the Crimson King and the Man in Black like is the darkness, and King wrote himself into the white, but almost as like this kind of
Like
he's just like
ignoramus.
he like needs to be there, but it's just like he's not as active a participant as Roland and Eddie and Susanna and Jake and Hoy.
I mean, he's almost doing it by accident. I mean, he kind of is.
I mean, what'd you think about how King was talking about how, and when I say King, I mean the character King.
Right.
It's difficult to have.
I love how we have to make that distinction.
We do have to.
Like I said, I came around. I like it a lot.
Yeah,
Actually, it's
totally.
fun.
But what do you think about King saying that he felt like it like freaked him out to write it? He didn't like writing it because it felt like there were forces that were trying to make it so he wasn't able to. I loved that. I thought that was great.
Now, I don't know how meta that is. Like, did he literally feel like that? Or no, it was like obviously the forces of the Crimson King trying to be like, don't aid the quartet.
So I think it serves the story, and he wrote it in to serve the story. And I think also maybe he was using it in a way of like kind of expressing maybe where some of his reluctance to work comes from, or like his days where he feels really lazy, or he feels like maybe
Hmm.
he was excited initially about something, but now he's not anymore. And I'm sure that happens so much, even to like the best writers, where it feels like work and it feels like they started something and they were excited about it and then it felt like they weren't really supposed to be doing it, but then there's like another part of them that made them feel like they had to finish it and they didn't really
Right.
know like where that was coming from.
Like, I
So
wonder if like
maybe,
his substance abuse was like a way to try to like numb the calling to
yeah,
write,
maybe,
Like, I
yeah,
don't know. I kind of
maybe.
got deep with it in my brain. But
I'm sure he did too. I mean, and he's like kind of like anthropomorphized or personified his substance abuse. I think that Annie Wilkes in Misery is supposed to be a representation for like cocaine or insert
hmm,
whatever drug he was abusing. It was holding him hostage, like it was keeping him locked up when he was trying to write and trying to
right.
dictate the way that he was writing, and he felt like without it he wouldn't be able to write and all this stuff. So I think that he is pouring quite a bit of himself into at least the meta part of this book, if not a bunch of other parts as well. But this is like very like obvious, like this
Oh
is.
yeah,
But
and
I think
it's
it's pulled off.
I agree. I agree. Like I said, I kind of had to go back and listen to it again, and then I like made my decision after that, and I liked it. He executed well, and I think it's fun because I bet you at one point his editor was like, just this once, Stephen, just this once. And then he was like, okay, that's fine. But by writing himself into this story, he wrote himself into all his stories because this is
Yeah, all
the
of them.
story, right? And so he kind of gave himself
Well, it's like
a
most of
golden
them.
ticket, so to speak, to if he wants to. He has a mechanism that can take himself into any of his stories, you know?
Yeah, like if he wrote like a sequel to like Insomnia or something like that, then he could just throw himself in there and it would all kind
Right.
of
Now, the thing that I didn't really understand is like, okay, he's creating the story. So is that why he's protected from the Crimson King trying to kill him too? Because he created the Crimson King needs him to live because he's writing him too? Yeah, like I knew that he was obviously kind of like the father of Roland and Eddie and stuff, but I didn't know if he was also the father of everyone else,
so
everything.
he's like mentioning the Crimson King. I look at it, this is the way that I think about it, but like I think of it as like the other side of the white or the Crimson King or the Man in Black or whatever, whoever's influencing him is also influencing him to create who's influencing him. You know what I mean? So
Right,
it's like
right.
a
Okay.
yeah,
Oh
it's like
boy, that
I
gets
know
deep.
it's so crazy.
Brain, no. We just like lined two thought mirrors up and it was like
I know exactly.
infinite.
Yeah, it's like they need him to mention them so that they can get him to not mention them or like stop mentioning them or something. It's so
What
it's
I liked
breaking my
was he
brain.
wasn't inner circle. Like I said, his execution was very good. He wasn't just like immediately part of the group because it would be easy to become that, knowing the characters as intimately as he does.
I
But he
think
was very
that's
much an outsider.
I think that's why he created the Cullum character. And part of me, I don't know how true this is, but I wonder if he had written himself as Cullum initially and then split that character into two different characters. Like I wonder if he was like, all right, so I'm gonna like pop in and save them during this ambush, and then I'll give them a bunch of other answers to stuff. And then he was probably like, no, that's too much of me. I'll create this other character who is kind of Cullum isn't Katet, but he like shares Kef with them. You know what I mean?
Yes,
It's like Colum is a really interesting
he's a
little,
very
but that's
interesting
kind of
character.
drifting into book seven, and we
Yeah, yeah. I don't
promised
want
we
to talk
wouldn't do
about it. I
that.
have
So yeah,
questions. We
that's
won't do
fine.
that. Okay, so I didn't get about the whole Stephen King sequence, and especially the ending when he fleshes it out a little bit more, where he's talking about his wife warning him from the jogging, and then he dies. Right? He like writes his own death, kinda. I don't get it.
I think we're gonna have to talk about that in episode seven.
Okay, okay,
Um,
it's not finished.
right? Yeah.
Okay, because I was really confused on
Yeah.
that. I was like, wait, what?
He did write himself dying, but
Right?
they have to.
Like
Yeah,
that
I don't.
happens in the book
It's for
at the
just
end.
at least for the benefit of the people listening to this episode that haven't read book seven yet. Let's just not go through
Okay,
that yet. I want to. I want to get into that, and we're going to on the next episode. But I think that that's the weird thing about this book, and even to some extent, Wolves of the Kala. But I feel like book six and book seven are like one big book. Book five is also part of that one big book, in my opinion. But especially books six and seven feel like one big book, and so
hmm
it's a little difficult. I'm glad we're breaking this up. I had actually had the idea of doing one big long episode on both six and seven, but I'm
Oh
glad
my
we're kind of
gosh, we just were having a conversation about how we don't ever want to be the 4 hour long podcast guys. Yo,
it would have been
I
a
was
4 hour long
surprised.
episode.
I found it an interesting choice, especially having read some of the seventh book, of where he decided to break those books. Because it seems like it would have been well served 100 pages into the seventh, knowing what I know then. I just feel like the climax of that book is in the beginning of the first one. Why do you think he did that? What's your thoughts there?
I think it makes a decent amount of sense to have the cliffhanger where it's at because it's stopping right before the reader's expectation of quite a bit of action.
Mm-hmm.
So, but it does feel like you're ending on no action almost. So it's an odd place to stop it, but
Yeah.
it feels very abrupt because they just like Jake and Callahan just kind of walk in there and then that's the end, except for
Right.
the
And
the
you're like, one of
postscript
these characters is probably going to die.
or both or like
Or
who, you know
both.
what I
Yeah.
mean? Like you're left in this spot because like Jake and Callahan, I really love Jake and Callahan together.
Me
By the
too.
way, they had
Me
some
too.
really excellent
And Oi.
conversations.
Can't forget Oi.
Well, okay, we'll never forget Oi. Oi is
Yeah.
always in my heart. But before they walk into the Dixie Pig, Jake and Callahan are
This is my favorite
basically
scene.
they're like resigned. They're both pretty sure they're about to die.
Yep.
You know?
In a brave way.
Yeah, but they don't
Like they're
even
both
know.
like stoked, not stoked for their death, but like excited
Oh.
to experience the justice, like
Oh yeah, they're for the white man. Like
Yeah, like
they're
Jake kind of
standing
has
and
like a
being
like
true.
violence hard on, just like, all right,
Oh
this
my
is what we're
god.
gonna do.
Jake in this
Um,
book is so great when he does like the whole like I'm walking here, like that whole
yeah,
part where he's about to shoot that guy for almost hitting Oi, which I would probably do if someone almost hit Oi too. I'd be
I
so
almost stopped reading because I thought he was hit
oh
with. I
yeah.
was like, if Oi dies that way, like I'm just
Getting
sorry,
hit by a
guys,
car. Oh
I'm not
god.
gonna finish this.
It's
I was
okay
like
if Stephen
so
King gets
mad.
hit by a car, but not if
Uh,
Oi gets hit by a car.
no, no. I was very, very upset for a second there. I was like, no, he didn't.
Yeah, I think that Oi and Jake and Callahan were probably the high point for me, and it's cool that it's like left for the last part of the book. I think even King probably knew like Oi and Jake and Callahan work really well together,
Hmm.
and having them be kind of the. I mean, I liked Mia and Susanna quite a bit too, especially when they're in Fedig and talking, and we get a little bit more light shed on Mia. I think all of that works really well. I mean, I'd say my least favorite part of the book, even though I love Roland and Eddie's kind of like back and forth in the way that they communicate with each other, I didn't like them talking to Calvin Tower and Aaron Deepno, even though it was really important. It just wasn't that interesting. Like it's just
Right.
it. I like
It's
Calvin
like
and
Tower being kind of whiny.
yeah, exactly. For like a little, it's a little drawn out, and then like Deepno is such a kind of like vanilla character. Like Calvin and Deepno both together are not very interesting at all.
No.
And even with Eddie and Roland in the room, like there's only so much you can do with those two characters. So I'm glad that it was like this thing they did it, and then they were out of there kind of thing.
Hmm.
Actually, I have another question for you in regards to a lot of this. Is this was the first time that the quartet was truly separated, and felt like they were on very different missions. Like they are separated to a certain extent in Caliber and Sturgis, but they're all kind of still physically in the same area, and they do
Right.
see
They're
each
like
other.
sleeping at people's different
Right.
homes, but
But they
like
still see
that's
each other and meet up with each other and share kef and talk and stuff. But with this, they're separated by years, physical locales. What did you think about that? Do you think that they did well without each other to lean on as much? What did you think about their dynamics being a separated quartet?
I thought it was really good because you can see obviously they have some deficiencies and some like, oh man, this person, they even kind of talk about it sometimes. Like, I wish Roland was here to give us instruction on this, or this person's always so steadfast in that. I miss these aspects about the other parts of the group, but they are all individual. They're not one brain. They are all individual, separate, independent characters. And by kind of dividing them up a little bit, it gave each one the breathing room to grow just that much more,
Hmm.
especially Jake. And I guess Susanna too. Because the whole thing with Susanna is she's so used to, which is why Mia was so successful, right? She's so used to and accepting of other voices inside of her own head. In fact, she kind of grows comfortable with Mia and like they almost like develop like a friendship kind
Yeah, it's like a
of.
weird, it's like a companionship or like a
Yeah,
camaraderie
yeah,
almost.
companionship. That's the right way
Yeah.
of putting it. She wasn't lonely because she had Mia. And they both needed each other. Obviously, Mia doesn't know how to interact in like modern day New York, and so she needs a Detta to help her get, or Susanna to help her get around. But
I think it
she
was
was
really well done.
it was
Like,
very well done.
I mean, because Mia and Susanna, um, like the situation that they're in is really weird, right? I mean, like it's not Susanna's baby, but it's like kind of Susanna's baby, but it's mostly Mia's baby. And Mia
I
like
don't
made this
really
deal.
get
I
that.
can explain some of this
Okay,
for you.
cool.
Okay, so to
And like,
my
how's
knowledge,
Roland?
okay,
Okay, yeah,
so
keep going.
so in the Gunslinger, remember when Roland? I think it's in the way station, or it could be. I think it's another part.
It's in the first book, and it's right before they go through the mountain. Yep.
Right, it's that part. Yeah.
Yep.
So
Yeah, and that's what they. So he holds onto his
so that thing
ism.
was a succubus, and it held on to Roland's seed, and then
Okay.
switched to an incubus when it had sex with Susanna in book 3, and then it switched back to like a woman like demon type thing, which is Mia, and then
Oh,
and so it
how
was
to
able
get
to like
inside?
so it was able to like gestate a baby in Susanna with the personality of this demon.
How did it
It
get
was
inside Susanna though?
it was in her the whole time. Like from it like at least this is
From
how I'm
when?
looking at it. From when Susanna had to have sex with that demon
Oh,
to in the wastelands when Jake was coming through the door.
So it wasn't
right?
so much of as an inseminating her, it was like merging the demon's body that was already starting the process with her and taking one of her eggs. I mean,
Okay,
probably
so
shouldn't delve into the
this
science,
is
but
this is
like
a very weird thing. So I'm trying my
it's
very
so
best to
weird.
explain this. So like Roland inseminated this demon thing in book 1, right? And
Yeah.
then
That was the most shocking part of book one for me. I was like, oh,
Susanna,
that happened.
yeah, and then Susanna had sex with the same like entity in book
Right.
3.
They
and
didn't
and
know that
if
though.
I'm wrong about this, somebody send me an email, because like if you're right about this, go off, like
No, you're
congratulations, because
right.
I've
I'm
been
like
trying.
remembering a
Okay, so
conversation with the characters as you're saying it that
and
is
then
for me.
Mia is like this presence, like this thing that is pregnant with Roland's baby through Susanna as like a sort of physical like surrogate. And then Mia, that entity, was able to make a deal with Sayer so that if she made the birth possible and like brought Susanna physically to the Dixie Pig and then therefore to Fedig, right? Then they would be able to separate the two of them and then make sure that the baby was born. And they promised Mia that she'd be able to have it for a few years and like love it and take care of it and
Right,
stuff.
like 3 to 5 years.
Right, exactly. So like that, at least to my knowledge, is
That
like,
sounds right.
and so
I obviously don't
Susanna,
understand like the mechanics involved.
so
Like how do they
Susanna has
separate?
like a working knowledge of like what's going on here, and at first she's really creeped out by it, isn't super comfortable with it, doesn't like it, doesn't like Mia, is annoyed
No
with
doubt.
Mia, but then like towards, it's like you're starting to kind of see like, so she at least has some sort of like sympathy for Mia and understanding, some empathy there, even though like she doesn't want like
Right.
Susanna doesn't want the baby.
No,
You know what I
but
mean?
there's like obviously like no better candidate ever than someone having another person inside them because she's kind of been multiple people all her life.
Yeah, it's. I would say, as far as weird things in these books, that takes the weird cake. You know what I mean? Like that's one of the things where King really took the ball and ran with it,
Yeah,
and
whatever.
was. I mean,
Because
once
like
we
Dead is
talk.
still around. She still comes up from time
Oh
to
yeah,
time.
that is still there. Yeah,
She's like not as heavy as a operator of the machine that is Susan, but like she'll pop out from time to time and say super mean things, or be when Susanna needs to be like super tough and
I
mean.
was gonna say, yeah, it's like not even just that Detta is mean. It's like Detta is
She's
just a
working
little
together
right.
with
Well,
Susanna.
what I'm curious about is like, is Susanna, and this is something that I still don't really know for sure after even my second read through, but like, do you think that Susanna is a wholly different personality, or do you think that she's a combination of Detta and Odetta, or do you think that Odetta, Detta, and Susanna are all wholly separate personalities, and then Mia was like this fourth kind of personality? Because I feel like Mia isn't like Detta.
No,
You know what I mean? Mia's like this whole
no,
other thing.
whole other thing.
But Susanna was acting as Mia physically, and like a physical manifestation of Mia, just like
Mhm.
she's a physical manifestation of Detta. So like
Right
this
before
is
they actually
very,
start trading places.
oh my god, it's so
Like
much.
you're in control.
Like,
I'm in
I'm
control.
really honestly really proud of myself and proud of you for even being able to have like a coherent
This
conversation
conversation.
about it.
Okay, this is what I think
good.
happened.
Yeah.
I think Odetta is gone completely. I think that character morphed and combined with part of Detta to create the mostly flushed out full person that is Susanna, who's like 80% a person. But there's 20% left of Detta that is a well-meaning hard ass.
Right.
Like
I
a
like
good
that.
person,
Yeah.
but like and I don't even think they're separate. I just think Susanna thinks of it this way because it's so comfortable and like it's a safe place for her to be talking to herself. I think it's just kind of the self-preservation, self-preservative and tougher skin that we'll sometimes all wear in certain situations.
Yeah.
That she just kind of personifies and brings to the forefront.
Yeah, see, it's like I don't even know how right you are about that, but it sounds
I have no
right.
idea. Yeah, right. And like Odetta's never mentioned again.
She is though.
It's just Detta and it's just Susanna.
Oh yeah, no, you're right. Odetta is not.
Odetta, yeah, Odetta's gone.
I have another question here for you.
Okay.
Did you notice any differences in Stephen King, like our Stephen King's, this level of the Towers, Stephen King's writing style when you compare this book and even book five to an extent, or book seven, or like I said on the previous episode, I think that books five, six, and seven feel very similar to each other. But did you notice any difference in his writing? Anything specific between these books and the ones that came out in like the 80s and 90s, or does it all feel kind of like one
It's
writer?
all,
Like,
I mean, it's all like such a wild storm that it's
yeah,
just like I'm just getting hit with chairs. I don't even know, like,
yeah,
like maybe one
yeah,
of them was a lawn chair or like a bird bath or something, but I don't know. It's so different. I'm in such a
yeah,
new crazy world all the time, literally and figuratively, that I did not notice any like specific differences in the writing style, maybe in his like choice of where he ended the book, because he certainly,
yeah.
I mean, I don't think that that's really new for King, though. Like, I think just reading these books, I can tell he loves to be like, and this crazy thing's going to happen tomorrow. you know, Being the connoisseur of King that you are, tell me, I'm sure you have opinions here.
So like I've read a lot of King in most of his like eras, and one thing that I've noticed about like his older stuff, especially his like early to mid 80s stuff, is it seems a little bit more like fever dream ish. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
he was writing very much under the influence a lot of the time, and like I feel like
It's
his
a little fear and
writing
loathing-y.
I feel like his writing with his like post 2000s stuff, which is what books five, six, and seven are, they feel a lot more like kind of cleaned up, focused. Like he doesn't go on as many like narrative tangents, and he doesn't go on as many kind of like inner dialogue, like hop down memory lane kind of. He still does it
Okay,
for sure.
yeah.
He still does it, but and I think that like what's a good way of putting this? Like I feel like 80s King and even into 90s King is a little more like gross. Like he's trying to gross you out a little bit more. And then
Totally.
in as he's gotten a lot older, I feel like he
It comes to
doesn't
him
do it.
naturally.
He still does it, like obviously, but like
Yeah.
it's less about like balls and guts and sweat and stuff like that, and more about like you know kind of more abstract feelings and things like that.
hmm
So and I feel like his descriptions get a lot more sparse as he gets older. Not sparse, but like there's a lot more brevity to his descriptions as he's gotten older as well. So when someone walks into a room, he's kind of hitting high points instead of like relating what something looks like to something that someone else is thinking about, like he would have like in his earlier work. And
Right.
usually that thing that he's relating it to is like kind of gross or dumb or weird or something.
Yeah.
So
He
like
loves to see his story through a third party.
yeah, and he still does it as he's getting older, but I feel like it's just a little bit more focused and a little bit
Better.
more like kind of he's just like more on the ball with stuff, which sounds like a compliment, but I much prefer his like older,
You like
more
the fever dreamy.
visceral, like yeah, I kind of like prefer that stuff. It's just it feels like more of a voice. Like I feel
Hmm.
like as King has gotten a lot older, and especially if you read a lot of like The Outsider, The Institute, or even like Fairy Tale to a certain extent, it feels much more influenced by like your kind of more pop writers of like
Right.
it's
He's
more
like
like a
swimming in the stream now.
yeah, it's more of like a Grisham or a Patterson or like a John Irving or something like that.
Hmm.
But that's fine, and I like those writers. But you can tell that he's kind of like carried those influences a little bit more than like when he was writing more like Lovecrafty kind of. He's going out of his way to make you uncomfortable in a lot of his earlier work, and then he's going out of his way to stay uh, coherent. But maybe that's just my personal taste and like what I've noticed too, because it's so hard to like really put a writer like King into a box and say like
Right.
this
Like
is
I
how
noticed
he
no
writes
less
now.
discomfort for me in the first half of or
Oh yeah, he
most
still
of
goes
the
for
Dark
it.
Tower.
It just feels it just feels dirtier. The
Yeah.
earlier
Okay.
stuff feels dirtier, and this stuff feels more cleaned up. At least that's how I'm thinking of it. You know.
Almost in like a literally like, visual sense too. Like
Yeah, that's what it. Yeah,
yeah.
for
Yeah,
sure.
like an aesthetic. So one thing, and I haven't read enough King to know if this is like a thing that he does often. So like this will I'm gonna try to turn this into like a question format. Does he do this often? When there's a random little like what the hell moment when when Eddie and Roland just get done with going through the cave and they have their gunfight, And Eddie sees Roland tap his throat 3 times. And then he's like, oh, I need to ask Roland what that means. And then King's line is crazy. And it says, but he would never get the chance, as the next time he would think of it, death will have slipped between them. I'm like, whoa, 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 whoa. Did he just tell us one of them would definitely die? And it's
A little
like
sneaky there.
so random. Like you would I almost like skipped over it. I was like, whoa, 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 what?
Yeah,
like,
it's funny. Like, I wonder if it's like, I mean, obviously this has been edited, this has been combed over, but like it's just like, is he telling that to himself? Is this like his way of taking notes on his own work, and he just like accidentally leaves? I wonder that sometimes too with a lot of the stuff that he writes, where it's like, dude, are you sure you meant to like leave us
in there
on that? Like he ends chapters really frequently with of just being like, and that was the last time they ever saw each other, and it's like, wait, why did you do that?
You just
like,
answered the question of the mystery that you left it on. Like, what?
But I think he does a really good job at it, because it he doesn't give you the whole, like, he, you know, it's not like, and that was the last time they talked to each other because of this, you know what I mean? It's like, now you're going into this situation with more knowledge than you thought you were going to, but still not enough, you know? So I think he does it pretty well, but it's just like, it seems like one of those kind of like almost like no-brainer rules of writing. Like, don't give away the whole farm, dude. Like, what are you doing? Like, what, you want people to be surprised, but somehow you still are, you know?
Right. Yeah. So, he's like, I'm going to tell you guys a joke. This is the punchline though. Okay, now let me hit you with a joke. And then it kind of ends somewhere other than you thought it would take you.
Even though you had the punchline.
Right, which is almost really like more clever.
He's the man.
So he is the man. So a thing that I really liked was he gave Eddie the opportunity to relapse, and he didn't. And it was like, I'm glad we didn't have to go through that again, but I'm glad that he was presented with the option of going back down that road. And Even's kind of like stoked on. He's like, yeah, I'll take some. And then he's like, no.
Didn't he say like, I want 4 of those Percocet or something?
Yeah.
And the guy's like, really? You want 4? And he's like, I'll be fine. Definitely. But he doesn't do it, which is really cool.
I mean, he does take it for the gunshot wound that he has, but then he has the opportunity to take more later, and then it's going to become kind of like druggy behavior, you know? Like, he needed it medically for that.
But not, like, he didn't want to party.
Right, exactly.
But he probably did want to party, but he didn't.
But then he kind of stops himself. That, and then my other favorite part was just the conversation that Jake, kind of the rundown that he gives the priest.
Yeah.
Before going into, which, you know, we don't get in this book, but man, it's just Jake has come so far. He's just such a little man, and I'm proud of him, you know?
Oh yeah, we're all proud of Jake.
Yeah, I just had like tears in my eyes. Like, you tell him, Jake, you stay 10 feet to my left. As I go forward, you go forward. Like, just man, the fact that like he's leading that charge, like he's Roland's son.
He's Roland's son. It's so
Jake
perfect.
Is wonderful.
Okay, so we're gonna wrap it up here. I just want to ask you. I don't know if even we'll be able to wrap it up after I ask you this, because this could lead us down. I'll try my best. And this is my only opportunity that I'm going to have to ask you this question. So I'm going to ask you right now. How do you think book 7 is going to end?
Stephen King has proven time and time again his ability to go left when I think that is not even a direction the story could possibly go.
And then it's a hard left.
Do it. Yeah. But he doesn't do it with bludgeoning his story. He never beats the hell out of his story. It somehow naturally gets there. And you're like, okay. Like, man, he's very, very talented. Which is cool that like we're able to realize that while he's alive, you know, not like 200 years from now. It's like, cool, this guy's like just now getting realized for being what he is. I don't think it's changed very much from my prediction of the last one, and I think this is more of my hope than what I think is going to happen. I hope this story ends with Roland having sacrificed himself for the greater good, and kind of like a Jake going to fall moment, and he catches him, and in so doing dies, reaching the tower, getting to the top level, maybe not having it be empty, though I don't even know what that means. But obviously it's like not a good thing. So it's always like said with trepidation of like, and it could be empty. And it's like, what is that? But it's like the tower levels they're like all the worlds. Like, what is an empty world? I don't know. So, and I hope it ends with like Eddie and Susannah living hand in hand happily ever after. bad guy's dead, Jake kind of being like their son, but also cooler than them. I will be fine if Oi kicks the can in this last book if he does it in a way that saves an entire level of the tower.
Okay. Cool. I can't say anything about what you just said, but it's really interesting to hear. And by the time you and I are sitting down to discuss the answer to the question that I just asked you, that'll be the 7th episode of our journey to the Dark Tower. And what a journey this has been. Wow.
It has been.
Yeah, I'm so happy that we did this. This series was a really long time coming for the podcast, and I almost wanted to start the podcast with it, but we didn't have our chops yet.
No, we couldn't. It's like starting with Malazan or something. We got to work our way up to it. And this is one of those, we say this about every book, but this one especially is the journey was hugely augmented with not only the listeners, but especially like you and your brain and your knowledge of Stephen and your passion for the king writing the books or his works of literature. It made me, I think, like it a lot more, forced to think about it a lot more.
Yeah, I think you would have cruised right through it and you would have liked it. But this is one of those series that it's just as much fun to talk about it as it is to read.
Yeah.
And everybody listening, thank you so much for being part of this journey with us. We really, we would just be two guys talking in our rooms without you, and that's fun.
Man,
but
we'd be
it's so much
way
more fun.
less cool without you guys.
Yeah, with that, everybody, thank you so much for listening to this episode. We have one more episode for the core series, and then one episode after that for the Win Through the Keyhole. And then we're going to say goodbye to our friends that we've made along the way, the quartet that has been forming. And you're all part of our quartet. And we thank you for sharing Kef with us and listening to us, Dan Din.
Oh, absolutely. Wonderfully said, Evan. I'm also really excited that I get to experience one of the books of this series that you have never read before.
Yeah, that'll be really fun.
Together for the first time. It's like kind of a full Monty situation,
Everybody, hope you have an awesome rest of your day. And of course, happy reading.
Bye, everybody. And Evan, as always, long days and pleasant nights.
May you have twice the number.